recently went to a buffet and guess what? My blood sugar actually didn't rise much. Why? This is the possible reason. That is a very unusual meal, but I got good carb doesn't rise. No, good carb still rise. Today I'm going to answer this question that I was asked a few months ago by my clients. The question is, Sosan, I recently went to a buffet and guess what? My blood sugar actually didn't rise much. Why? Okay, before we begin, let's give you some kind of a little background information. So what causes your blood sugar to rise? Number one is carbohydrates, right? Carbohydrate in any form causes your blood sugar to rise, okay? And people say, no. But I got good carb doesn't rise. No, good carb still rise. It's just fast or slow. Let's take away the good and bad carb because I really don't want people to frame it as good and bad. I want people to frame it as certain carbohydrate takes longer time to break down and certain carbohydrate takes faster time to break down. So that's why we often say refined carbs are bad because they're faster to break down. But if you take away the bad, it's known that refined carbs just faster to rise. And when you are managing blood sugar, anything that takes too fast to rise may not serve you well, basically. So when you eat a meal that has a lot of carbohydrate or has any form of carbohydrate, it will break down into sugar and the blood sugar will rise. In her case, when she go to a buffet and her blood sugar actually did not rise much, this is the possible reason. Like I said before, first of all, carbohydrate will raises your blood sugar. But there are other food that doesn't raise your blood sugar very much, and that is protein, fiber, and fat. So when you go to buffet, tell me, what do you typically eat? Most Asian will go buffet may not necessarily eat their typical food like fried rice, noodle, bread, mashed potato of anything, because first of all, it fills your stomach very quickly. You get full very quickly, so it doesn't get your money's worth. So when you go buffet, you tend to eat food that are more protein based. So these protein based could be steak, any form of meat. It could be lamb chop, it could be your seafood, your fish, your lobster, your crab, your shrimp, and the list goes on. And if that buffet has Japanese, most people likely will eat sashimi. So those food that I just listed right now, these are all protein rich food. And protein, although when you break it down, it does have a small amount that it can raise your blood sugar, but in general, it doesn't raise the same degree as a carbohydrate. So if you go to a buffet and majority choices are these food that I just talked about right now, you will not see such a big rise in your blood sugar. And I said beside protein, there's other two things that doesn't really rise your blood sugar, and that is fiber. And where does fiber come in? Is your vegetable. So it could be your salad, your stir-fried vegetable, or any other form of vegetable that comes with that protein. So if you eat that vegetable, you're not going to increase your blood sugar as well because you cannot really break down fiber. Last is fat. So whether that fat is a healthier fat or not so good fat, like your deep fried chicken wings, for example, it still doesn't break down into blood sugar. And because of that, when you go to a typical buffet meal, majority people choices are revolving a lot of protein, maybe a little bit vegetable because you want to be healthy. Then it could be having a lot of fat because they might have deep fry something, right? So the fat, the fiber, and the protein, this meal itself doesn't really raise your blood sugar a lot. And so even though you felt you had a rich meal, you're eating a lot, you're not getting those blood sugar rises. On the other hand, if you were to eat at home, a typical maybe Asian family that I work with will be eating their bowl of rice, right? Then they will have a stir-fry dish, and stir-fry dish will be a mix of vegetable and protein. And typical Asian, when you do a stir-fry dish, vegetable is a little bit more than protein. But most Asian will eat rice the most. So when you eat a lot of rice, you get a little bit of vegetable, a little bit of protein to eat with that. That meal itself actually has more carbohydrate in relation to your protein and your vegetable, which is your fiber. So that meal itself can raise your blood sugar more than a buffet meal that's mostly protein, a little bit of vegetable, and maybe little to a lot of fat. Hope that explains why in my client's case, when she went to a buffet, she checked her blood sugar at home 2 hours later, her blood sugar sugar didn't rise much. So that's number one reason. Number two reason is how fast the food breaks down into sugar. When you think about refined carbohydrate, it breaks down fast. But when you think about carbohydrate that breaks down slower, they tend to be higher in fiber. But then at the same time, protein and fat takes a lot longer to break down, especially fat. So if your meal, for that particular meal, in her case, has a lot of protein and there's some little bit fiber and some fat, that itself takes a lot longer to break down than a typical meal that she has at home with rice and stir fry vegetable, meat and rice. So when she eats that meal at the buffet, the fact that it takes longer time to break down means that her blood sugar at 2 hours may not be at the highest point, because she might take 3 hours to break down that meal or 4 hours to break down that meal. So when she checks her blood sugar at 2 hours, she doesn't see the highest point. Maybe if she were to check it at 3 hours later or 4 hours later, she might see a higher point. So to compare to a 2 hour may not be a good choice for her, but it's normal, because usually when we work with diabetic patients, we often say, hey, check your blood sugar before your meal and check your blood sugar 2 hours after the meal. So she is just doing exactly what I suggested for her, and that's why you check it 2 hours later. But because that is a very unusual meal, higher protein than usual, there's not a lot of fiber, but definitely a lot higher protein, and there's some fat. That together takes the meal a lot longer time to break down. So she doesn't see that rise at 2 hours. So that explains why 2 hours later, her blood sugar didn't go up that high. Number three, but you said, hey, Sosan, I'm sure in buffet she eats dessert. You're right, she did eat dessert. However, she knows because she has diabetes, she was very careful. Although she did eat dessert, she didn't eat a lot of it. So that amount of carbohydrate in her dessert was actually very small in comparison to her protein, which is her meat and her seafood and her sashimi. And that's why overall it still doesn't increase her blood sugar a lot at 2 hour mark. So I hope this one helped you understand how choosing the choices of your meal, like the combination you eat, what kind of combination you can raise your blood sugar, how fast and how slow, can help you understand why eating a buffet does not necessarily mean your blood sugar goes higher. And in her case, it's a very good way to showcase to her that eating a meal that she thought was like, oh my goodness, I went overboard, actually didn't raise her blood sugar much, is because the composition of that food matters more. So the moral of the story is not to go crazy and go buffet, but when you go to buffet, don't get worried and think that buffet will ruin your blood sugar management. Just knowing that in buffet, you can actually eat very reasonable in a very healthy way to manage your blood sugar. And if you have friends who go eat buffet and they check your blood sugar and it doesn't go up too high, and she tells you eating buffet is good for her, at least share this video with her so that she understands why. And like I always say, 食得有型活得健康. We'll see you next time. Bye everyone. Bye everyone.